Communist China is flexing its military muscle this week as protests continue in Hong Kong. What are China's intentions and how should the U.S. respond? Notre Dame professor of political science, Victoria Hui, is here with analysis. And the pandemic lockdown is beginning to loosen, but not necessarily for churches. Why not? And what can be done about it? Activist Lisa Bergman of the St. Charles Borromeo Society is here to update us from Chicago. And he's the Oscar-nominated screenwriter for Mel Gibson's Braveheart and so many other incredible films. Randall Wallace talks about his faith, career, and his memoir, Living the Braveheart Life. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
Greetings and a warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Delighted you're here. Victoria Hui, Lisa Bergman, and Randall Wallace are here. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. First, Bishop Emeritus Joseph Zhu of Nanyang, China, has died at the age of 99. In February, he fell ill with COVID-19, but recovered, becoming the oldest Chinese citizen to beat the disease. He was first ordained in 1957. In 1964, he was sent to a forced labor camp because of his faith, and he was later sentenced to 10 years in prison and re-education on charges of counter-revolutionary activity. In 2002, he became Bishop of Nanyang. He served most of his priesthood as a member of the underground church. With Vatican permission, he resigned as bishop in 2010. But then asked to be officially recognized by the government-run Catholic Patriotic Association, which accepted his request. It is still unclear why he asked to be recognized by the government-run church. Sources say he was pressured. Others say Bishop Zhu's membership and move might have been a means of gaining leverage against the government to secure the return of church property seized during the Cultural Revolution. May Joseph Zhu rest in peace. And Wednesday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo notified Congress that the Trump administration no longer regards Hong Kong as independent from mainland China. Pompeo's statement comes amid calls in Congress for the U.S. to respond to Beijing's imposition of national security laws over the territory. This after thousands of protesters took to the streets in Hong Kong. Secretary Pompeo said, quote, Hong Kong does not continue to warrant treatment under United States laws in the same manner as U.S. laws were applied to Hong Kong before July of 1997. It is now clear that China is modeling Hong Kong after itself, end quote. The announcement by Pompeo does not impose any immediate penalties on China. Such action would have to be decided by the President and Congress, but the State Department has to evaluate that relationship every so often. Joining me now to discuss what is happening in Hong Kong, what it means for U.S.-China relations, and much more is Professor of Political Science at the University of Notre Dame, Victoria Hui. Professor, thank you for being here. You're a Hong Kong native. What do you make of Pompeo's statement first, and how dire is this situation for the people of Hong Kong?
Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, what is important is that Hong Kong is supposed to have an autonomous status. So what Pompeo was trying to decertify is that Hong Kong no longer has autonomy, which can then kick off a whole bunch of actions as stipulated by first the 1992 Hong Kong Policy Act and the revision also passed last year, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. At the same time, the situation is very dire. And in a way, it is almost about time for the world to recognize that Hong Kong really has no autonomy, that Beijing has broken the promises of one country, two systems, with Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong under a high degree of autonomy. So, and in fact, I would say that for 23 years, Beijing was taking actions in piecemeal to erode Hong Kong's freedoms, small steps, one at a time, so that the world, so for the past 20 years, whether it is Washington or London, they would issue reports and statements saying that they are very concerned about, for example, the abduction of a bookseller from Hong Kong taken across the border, another abduction of a billionaire who had very good connections to high levels corruption. or the disqualifications of democratically elected legislators. All of those actions every time, oh, these are concerning, but overall things are doing okay. But this time, Beijing took a very nuclear option, and so it just makes it impossible to look the other way.
Yeah, and let's talk about that option that they took here. On Thursday, China's legislature nearly unanimously approved a new national security law for Hong Kong, and it's really aimed at suppressing what they call subversion, secession, terrorism, or any acts that they deem a threat to national security. Now, the specifics of the new law have yet to be defined. However, the final rules will determine the fate of Hong Kong's autonomy, Professor. Is this the beginning of the end of Hong Kong's autonomy, that carve-out status that they had? And what does this mean to the protesters that you've written so eloquently about over the years?
Well, the important thing to also see is that this, what they passed at the National People's Congress, was a decision. And now the decision is going to be passed on to the National People's Congress Standing Committee to actually draft the law. Is this the end of the one country, two systems model, or Hong Kong, the end of Hong Kong? Definitely. But at the same time, for a lot of Hong Kong people, for my friends and family, now that when they go to the street, when they try to just go to restaurants, when they try to go to shopping mall, they already run the risk of getting tear gas by the police or getting pepper spray by the police, even if they are not even protesting. And then also, we grew up with all these freedoms that we could say whatever we like. These days, people don't even dare to really speak their minds. My sister was telling me that I should erase all of those pro-democracy posts on my social media. But of course, I'm already a quasi-public figure, so that would be pointless. But then I think some of my friends are unfriending me. And what the law does is to mark the formal end. And so turning things that have already become lived experiences of ordinary Hong Kong people into the law. And it's going to be even a lot more scarier.
Now, tell me how the protests we're seeing now, and they are limited because of COVID and because of, as you mentioned, the oppression and the regime watching carefully and arresting people. I've been witnessing some of these arrests on social media and elsewhere. Tell me the difference between these protests and the 2019 protests. Those were really about leadership and that extradition act where they were going to pull people out of Hong Kong and try them in mainland China. How is this different?
This is actually many times worse. So the extradition protest that was introduced by the Hong Kong government last spring would have, if it had been passed, would have allowed Beijing to request to have anyone in Hong Kong extradited across the border to Beijing and subject to mainland China's jurisdiction. We know how unjust the justice system in China is. What this bill would do, what this new law would do is, okay, you guys don't really want to be extradited across the mainland to the other side of the border. We are sending our state agents, our security agents, to come to Hong Kong and open shop in Hong Kong. And this is actually explicitly forbidden by the basic law, Hong Kong's mini constitution.
And that was an agreement made when the British left Hong Kong, and it was supposed to be Hong Kong was to be autonomous for 50 years, starting in 1997. That apparently is not. China's not holding up its end of the deal. Now, I just read a story in Politico. The British government is saying anyone with those BNO passports, British national passports, they can apply for British citizenship if China continues down this road with Hong Kong. Is that a good idea? Is that a lifeline to the Hong Kongers?
It is going to be basically a major piece of news for a lot of people in Hong Kong, because there's a big difference between how the Portugal government treated Macau, which was also returned to China in 1999. In Macau, everyone was offered a chance. Everyone who had been born before a certain date was offered a Portuguese passport. And so those people who value freedoms all left. And today, Beijing has actually taken over Hong Kong and has taken over Macau. And Beijing is trying to rein in Hong Kong the way that it has already reined in Macau. And the British governments never agreed to give Hong Kong citizens born before 1997 this exit option. And so you have the majority of Hong Kong population who demand freedom, who wants to preserve, who wants to defend what they have grown up with. And so why the national security bill is going to be so bad is that it's not just a minority of people who don't like Beijing, so that you can just make midnight knocks on the door and arrest these people and no one would care. But the majority of the population. So the act would turn Hong Kong into not just another Chinese city like Shenzhen or Shanghai, but it could turn Hong Kong into Xinjiang.
Wow. The Trump administration has not specified what measures it could take against China for this aggression in Hong Kong. However, during a press conference on Tuesday, President Trump was asked about sanctions against China. Here's what he said.
We're doing it now. We're doing something now. I think you'll find it very interesting. I'll be talking about it over the next couple of days. It's something you're going to be hearing about before the end of the week, very powerfully, I think.
Now, in a recent interview, Professor, you pointed out the international community, including the U.S., has often spoken out against China and the steady buildup of power over Hong Kong, but they haven't exacted any real punishments. You say Beijing is daring foreign governments to continue to issue words but take no actions. What measures or sanctions would you think might be effective at this point?
You are quite right. So I would say that even just a few weeks ago, I think the words, and probably Beijing were hearing the words too, that, oh, the State Department is unlikely to do anything major because the U.S. needs Hong Kong as much as Beijing needs Hong Kong. And so if you decertify Hong Kong's autonomous status, of course, this would hurt Hong Kong people rather than helping them. This would also hurt U.S. business interests and not just Chinese interests. And so imposing targeted sanctions on these officials and police officers who have abused the human rights of Hong Kong people would be an important step. But still, this may not be enough because, a lot of these people don't care about traveling to the U.S. They may not really care about getting visa to study at U.S. universities. And if these sanctions are going to be effective, they have to be coordinated with actually U.S. allies.
What do you make of the suggestion, and I've read some reports of this, I'm also hearing it from people in the diplomatic community, that the Trump administration is considering rescinding the visas of Chinese students studying in the United States, expelling them from our institutions of higher learning. Is that a good option?
So, what I read today is that this is going to be targeted at graduate students who have connections with military establishments in China. So it seems to be a very targeted move. This may make sense because if Chinese students, they come to the U.S. to get the undergrad education, they will be exposed to liberal arts education. They will be exposed to, writing these essays, addressing counter-arguments and thinking broadly and critically. But when they come here just to go to grad school, that's very different. Especially, I think that people become very worried about all these STEM disciplines. Maybe they will get actually because grad students are very integrated into the research community, and so they may actually learn more. So people are hoping that beyond targeted sanctions, beyond imposing visa restrictions, that there may actually be more actions, maybe stronger actions about Hong Kong's separate customs status. What Beijing has done is that it's been trying to stifle Hong Kong's freedoms, yet preserving a special customs status granted by the U.S. and all the different international Western countries. And so that may be a much stronger trump card.
Do you think the Chinese are using this global COVID crisis that is partially they're doing, as well as the U.S.-China trade agreement, to cover for these aggressive acts, not only in Hong Kong, but we see the military buildup and the aggression toward Taiwan. And there seems to be a military buildup as well.
You are quite right. So Beijing has been taking very aggressive action, not just against Hong Kong, but also intruding into the median line, separating the Chinese territory, mainland territory, and Taiwanese territory in the East China Sea. Also sending out troops to also breach the border with India, and also taking more actions in the South China Sea. Yeah, so across the board, definitely thinking that, well, the rest of the world, they may not like it, just like we built up all these islands and reefs in the South China Sea. They condemn us, but what actions have they actually taken? And so, and also that all these Western economies, they're probably so hard hit by the coronavirus. whereas the Chinese economy has recovered much faster because they can take very draconian measures, and so they have put the virus under control. Probably just thinking that, you guys may have continued to condemn us, but if you don't take any actions, we don't care. And so it is actually very good, a good sign that there's a declaration, there's a decertification, and some actions have to follow.
Well, they're provocative acts. You mentioned it. There have been clashes between Indian troops and Chinese troops in the Himalayas. We see aggression toward Vietnam, Taiwan. It seems they want to spread the hegemon throughout Asia. And is it time for the United States to align closely with India and perhaps help India and make India our partner in checking China?
It is correct in a way that the administration has been trying to build the Indo-Pacific kind of quasi-alliance. So it is a very good sign. But it's just as important as you also mentioned Vietnam. Vietnam wanted to get into the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact, so badly. But the current administration, as soon as they came into office, they could pull out of it. A lot of these Asian economies, they are so beholden to the Chinese economy, and this is why Beijing can coerce them, can threaten them, and yet they don't dare do anything. So it is, on the one hand, the administration should take very strong actions against Chinese actions, but you also don't want the U.S. to take actions unilaterally, and so then essentially driving these other countries to become even more dependent on the Chinese economy. So the TPP probably should be restored along with restoring or strengthening the U.S. security alliances. For example, not telling Korea that you guys have to take care of your own security bills and military bills that we're not paying.
Yeah, no, it leaves all sorts of openings for China, and they have the money to burn, and they don't care about human rights, so they will use their people as slave labor, and they can always beat a competition in trade and in the building of goods. I mean, this is the challenge with China. Finally, before I let you go, I only have a minute. What do you make of the religious hostility that the Chinese government has shown toward people of faith in the mainland? I mean, the Pope commended the faithful of China to the Blessed Mother this week. He tried to engage them with this still private deal signed between the Vatican and the Chinese government. Did that deal buy the Vatican any real leverage, in your opinion?
I do not think so. The most important thing to understand is that for the CCP, they are above God. And if people pledge their allegiance to something other than the party, outside of the party, that is why Beijing doesn't really like it. This is why they're tearing down crosses on the top of churches, even state-sanctioned churches. And so the deal the Vatican has struck with Beijing is really a bad mistake.
Wow. Well, we will leave it there. Professor Hui, thank you so much for your time. We will check in the days ahead. Professor Hui's latest columns on China and Hong Kong are available at victoriatbhui.wordpress.com. Professor, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Lisa Bergman is next, but first, on May 30th, Pope Francis will lead the major shrines around the world in praying the Rosary for the Blessed Mother's protection amid the coronavirus pandemic. Francis will pray at the replica of the Lourdes Grotto in the Vatican Gardens on Pentecost Eve. Among those who will accompany the Pope will be a doctor, a nurse, a recovered COVID patient, as well as a person who lost a family member to the virus. Shrines around the world will connect to the event and take part in the prayer, including the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. The service will take place at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. On Wednesday, Pope Francis approved a miracle attributed to the intercession of Father Michael McGivney, the founder of the Knights of Columbus. This will pave the way for his beatification. According to a statement from the Knights, the miracle involved an unborn child in the U.S. who was healed in utero of a life-threatening condition in 2015. McGivney founded the Knights of Columbus in 1882 to provide spiritual aid to Catholic men and financial help for their widows and families. The first American parish priest to be beatified, McGivney will soon be declared blessed. A second miracle is required for McGivney's canonization. And on Tuesday, the Diocese of St. Cloud, Minnesota, reached an agreement to settle legal claims with survivors of clergy sexual abuse. The diocese said the agreement includes a $22.5 million trust to compensate abuse victims, along with plans for the diocese to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. In a news release, St. Cloud Bishop Donald Kettler apologized to survivors for the harm they suffered and said he will assist in the healing of all those who have been hurt. The diocese said it will disclose the names of all clergy who have been credibly accused of abuse. On Tuesday, an executive order was issued in Howard County, Maryland, effectively banning the distribution of Holy Communion, the most vital part of Catholic worship. The original order stated, quote, "There shall be no consumption of food or beverage of any kind before, during, or after religious services, including food or beverage that would typically be consumed as part of a religious service." After outcry by the Archdiocese of Baltimore and people of faith, Howard County on Thursday announced they were lifting the ban in light of Governor Larry Hogan's announcement that Maryland restaurants are being allowed to reopen. The Archdiocese of Baltimore hailed the decision and pledged to work with the state and county to ensure safety and the common good as churches resume services.
We need our churches and our synagogues and our mosques. We want them open. Churches, synagogues, mosques, and other. We want them open, and we want them open as soon as possible. And if I have to, I will override any governor that wants to play games. Now, there may be some areas, by the way, where the pastor or whoever may feel that it's not quite ready, and that's okay. That's okay, but let that be the choice of the congregation and the pastor.
President Trump earlier this week speaking about the essential nature of worship as the country begins to reopen. Joining us now to discuss the tension between the First Amendment right to religious expression and public health is Lisa Bergman. She's co-founder of the St. Charles Borromeo Society. Lisa, why do so many think, and particularly governors, they've been slow to open churches, even if the pastors and parishes are following social distancing and safety guidelines practiced by groceries and casinos? What's the reluctance here?
Honestly, I wish I knew, because that's the number one perception that we keep trying to fight, is this very strange perception that somehow churches are more dangerous than any of those, essential businesses that you've named. I can't think of a single reason why, and so I really don't know why that perception just continues to persist.
Now, you're working from a grassroots level, and you started an organization to push the Catholic hierarchy to speak out and restore the sacraments to the faithful. Give me a sense of where you believe we are today. I mean, we saw California, they're opening up. They even went beyond the governor's orders and said, no, we're going to go and, open up to this capacity. Then you have other places like your archdiocese in Chicago. You still don't have masses.
Right, yes. Well, I mean, I think as a country, we've come a long way just in the past month or so. May has seen a lot of openings around the country, but certainly there are some frustrating areas like Chicago Archdiocese, like you mentioned, where there seems to be reluctance even among those who you would think would be pushing for the opening of the churches. And, there's a limited amount that we can do to change that, but nevertheless, we do it because it's the right thing to do.
The mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, had this to say about the reopening of churches.
This is like turning a dimmer switch, not flipping a light switch. And these that we hope to bring online at some point in Phase 3 include summer programs and youth activities, especially those at our parks, religious services, gyms, and, yes, the lakefront and beaches, all hopefully later in June.
Does that sound like a workable timetable for you?
Yeah, I don't understand why we don't have our churches open already. We have them open in many other states. And, when you look at what happened in Minnesota when the governors tried to keep them shut down and the Minnesota bishop said, no, this is important enough that we are not going to follow that order. It is not being applied evenly. It's not being applied fairly. And we're going to do what's right for our congregations. That's the sort of stance that we should expect to see from those who are supposed to be defending the faithful. They're supposed to be our shepherds. They're supposed to be there for us. And so, we've really applauded that courageous action by the Minnesota bishops, and we'd like to see that happen in other places.
Are you satisfied with the way the Archdiocese of Chicago is working with the state to reopen? They seem to be following Pritzker's lead on this, the Illinois governor, Cardinal Blaise Cupich. He's got this 3-point phase-in plan, and it's rather complicated. And bottom line is you still don't have masses there.
Right, and we don't even have a date set for when they will resume. And really, part of the problem is not just the phasing, but he's also requiring each parish to become certified in order to reopen. And this is a very confusing requirement because that's not been required in any other diocese up to now that I'm aware of. It's also not been required in any other essential business. And so you have to wonder why he chose to place that burden on himself when it wasn't asked for. And, you know, in the hoops that have to be jumped through in order to get that certification, and the warning that spot checks will be performed randomly to ensure continued compliance, just isn't the language of the church. So we're
well,
really
not only is it not the language of the church, you know, people keep talking about controlled studies. There's no controlled studies of you know, temperature checks or mask wearing. All of this is voodoo science. I mean, they're throwing stuff at the wall, hoping that this will mitigate. But if you look at the trajectory of this virus seems to have had its peak. It's coming down. It's dying out. That's what happens with viruses. Happened with MERS. Happened with SARS. There's no vaccines to some of these things. They just die out. But I agree with you. There seems to be a predilection on the part of some bishops to close churches down early and then wait for the states to give them the high sign, or in some cases ignore the states altogether. I mean, in Nevada, there was initially a 10-person limit on religious services, but after backlash from the Justice Department, the governor changed that to a 50-person limit because that's what he was requiring of other businesses. Are those restrictions accessible, and should the Catholic Church be beholden to them?
I mean, I think we both can see that that's obviously a no. Why would we apply a different standard to the church than we're applying anywhere else? And when you look at the history of the Catholic Church, I mean, we basically invented hospitals. We, you know, our saints went out and saved people in the streets. Why on earth would you not trust us to have people's best interests in mind? That's crazy.
But before I let you go, and it's such an important topic because, I mean, look, my take is it's beholden and it's a duty of every pastor and every bishop to keep his people safe. We want to be safe. But you can be innovative and you can be creative about the way you keep people safe. Here in New Orleans, they've had outdoor masses for weeks in parking lots. And in some of the bigger churches, you can have 200, 300 people in there, and there's still social distancing. There are ways to do this. And with the enormous churches in Chicago and some of the huge parking lots in the suburbs, you could certainly do that with no risk to life or of spreading contagion. Tell me about the St. Charles Borromeo Society. You're sponsoring a National Day of Prayer on May 30th at 8 p.m. What's that about, and how can we find out more about your society?
So the St. Charles Borromeo Society was something that we put together in order to kind of create a place where everyone who's frustrated about this situation can come, and they can meet up with other people who are also frustrated and want to do something about it. So that we have a forum, you can go on there, you can find your state, your city, and you can post something saying, I want to meet up to pray, have a prayer rally, and other people can meet you there so that, you know, you're not alone. We also have all sorts of different resources that you can look at, canon law resources. We have the actual document that was created by the Thomistic Institute for the USCCB, which actually tried to balance the importance of keeping people safe along with the integrity of the sacraments so that neither one is risked. You know, you can look at all of that. And so, you know, those are important things to know about. And then, like you mentioned, we are calling for a National Day of Prayer on the eve of Pentecost. That's this Saturday. And like you said, that's at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, and rolling on through the other time zones. We're asking people to get out there and sign a petition with your feet, because a petition with electronic signatures is too easy to ignore. And when you're out there standing in a big circle around your cathedral, that's pretty hard to ignore. And we really need to have a show of solidarity to show our bishops, our governments, and other Catholics, other Christians, just how important this really is, that it's perfectly safe and that we need access to the sacraments.
You can find out more about the St. Charles Borromeo Society at openourchurches.org. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
He's an Oscar-nominated screenwriter for his work on Mel Gibson's Braveheart, which is having its 25th anniversary this month. He's directed such films as The Man in the Iron Mask, We Were Soldiers, and Secretariat. He's also a novelist, a songwriter, and a committed Christian. I sat down with him at his home in Malibu, California, to discuss his memoir, Living the Braveheart Life, Finding the Courage to Follow Your Heart. Here is my exclusive interview with Randy Wallace. I want to start, Randy, with your father, Thurman. What did he teach you about storytelling? In your book, you talk about how what a sort of garrulous, warm, engaging personality he was. How did he teach you to tell stories?
My father taught me that a story has to be relevant. It has to mean something to engage the audience. He would tell stories because he wanted to connect with people. So that was the first thing. But he would tell a story that they cared about, that was about something that would entertain them and captivate them and ultimately inspire them. My father was about inspiration.
He was a salesman.
He was a salesman.
Right, by trade.
But my father's thing was, I'll never sell anyone something that won't get them to prosper. He would say to me, if our customers don't prosper, then we starve.
And he did not want his son being a storyteller. He didn't want you to be a writer.
No, he wanted me to be a salesman. He wanted me to be in the family business. And in a certain way I am, but in a much grander or different sense. Than
you have different customers than we have.
Yes, different customers.
Very different customers. You go to Duke and you decide to study religion.
Yeah.
Why would you study religion? One practices it, but did you have aspirations of leading a church, being a pastor?
To me, that would have been a little bit getting it the wrong way around. I wanted to find whatever it was that I was made to do, and I was following religion because it fascinated me. I thought, and still do, I still believe that the study of faith, what we would die for, is about what we would live for. Like, I've never been so concerned with life after death as much as I am with life after birth. How do we live fully? How do we have life and have it more abundantly?
And music became a big passion of yours during this period. And yet, you weren't so sure if that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I had a plan. It's always annoyed me that God's plans are better than my own. I mean, that really disturbs me.
I have that routine too. I know of what you speak.
And so I love music, and I love the feeling that I get when, and we, in our church, we would all sing at the top of our lungs and the top of our hearts, so that a congregation lifting up their voices would be as close to God as I knew how it was possible to feel. And when I would write a song or sing, as every aspiring songwriter does, in the bathroom, because it sounds better.
That's right, you get all that resonance.
Yeah. When I would do that, I would feel a real sense of passion, and I wanted to follow that passion. So I thought, this will be the path, at least the one I'll explore first.
And you have a meeting with Chris Christopherson at one point, which you were telling me about. It's also in the book. Tell me about that meeting. It was rather pivotal for you. I mean, it set you down a path.
It absolutely did. I thought then and think now that he's one of the greatest American poets who's ever been. I loved his music, and he was doing poetry in music, and though no one ever thought of Chris Christopherson as the greatest of singers, like the singers who sang his songs,
right.
I thought he was a terrific performer and singer because he was authentic. I wanted to be like him. Here he was, he was an Army Ranger. He had been a boxer and a football player. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He had studied Byron. He was a poet through and through. And here he was, also commercially successful in Nashville, but he wasn't the Nashville that I had grown up knowing. He was something new. So he was coming to my university. I finagled to be backstage. I went up to him, I tried not to interrupt him, and I said, I really want to write songs. And he said, then you've got to go to Nashville.
So you end up in Nashville, you're writing music. What happened?
Well, I signed with the most successful Nashville music publisher, Tree Music, and I was around some terrific songwriters. I think the big, and many of them were having huge success, and I wasn't, at least in the ways of the world.
Right.
I think I was where I needed to be, but I wasn't writing songs that were becoming hits. And a great country icon named Wesley Rose, who had been Roy Acuff's partner, his father had been, said to me, is your heart really here? And I said, no, I don't think it is. And he said, don't sell your soul for a few pennies. You've got to go where your heart is. If this is the kind of music that you want to be doing, stay here. But if it's not, and he had listened to my songs and he liked them, but he said, this isn't what the country music world is doing right now. You need to find someplace else.
And you end up in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Why Hollywood?
Why Hollywood was a question that everyone who loved me asked. And I wanted to come to California largely because I wanted the challenge. I wanted to be in an environment where everybody didn't believe as I believed. It was my same idea that I've always followed of, I'm in some ways created to be a stranger in a strange land.
And still with the intention of writing music.
Yes.
Now, you end up working with Stephen Cannell, a great writer, producer of television, did hit after hit after hit. What did you learn from him? How did you end up there, from music to writing for television?
Steve was a genius at many things, not only at writing, but at teaching. But I think the greatest thing he conveyed to me was a passion. He loved what he was writing. And that taught me an enormous thing. That was a great gift. To say, go down the road of where you're really having fun. He once said to me, you know why people do business with us? And I was his protege for several years. He said, yes, they know we'll always deliver a professional product. Yes, they know we'll do it on time. But the main thing is that they enjoy it. They like us. And that's important to remember. So he was much like my father in that way.
You have a Braveheart moment. That's what you call it in your book. When you're still writing, but things aren't clicking, and you're worried that you're not going to be able to feed your family. You have a family now.
Yes.
You're married, you have a family. I want you to go back 10 years prior. You're in Scotland.
Right.
And you're visiting a castle.
Yes.
And here's a statue. And you thought what when you saw that statue of William Wallace?
I felt that I had come across a story that was as provocative as if someone had said, St. Peter and Judas Iscariot were the same person. It was that big a story, that unique a story for me. Here's the story of a man who is Scotland's greatest hero. He has the same name as I do. I believe in every fiber of my being that he's actually one of my ancestors, but I've never heard of him. Why has he been buried to history? Why is he lost? Who was this man? How did he become his country's greatest hero? What made him that? And was there something in the quality of the way he lived and died that transformed Robert the Bruce from being a scurrilous coward to being his country's greatest king? That scurrilous coward part, that transformation part, was what I was looking for in my own life. People will say to me, don't you see yourself as William Wallace? And I go, nah, I kind of see myself as Robert the Bruce.
Yeah, I read that in the book. Of all the characters, I mean, this is the traitor.
Yeah.
This is the guy who ends up being the traitor. Now, he has his turnabout at the end, but he goes to kill Wallace at one point.
Yeah. And when I think about these things, when I actually pause to reflect on them, it sort of explains why, and I talk about this in the book too, why I follow Jesus. Because here's this element. People say all these things that we think Jesus taught, and he's a great, yes, and he did, and as C.S. Lewis would say, he's a great moral teacher, of course. But let's forget the nonsense about that that's all he was, or he was, that's what makes him distinct. The story for me is, there are 100 sheep, and 99 of them are in the fold, and one of them is lost. And the shepherd goes out and finds that lost one. I'm not the shepherd, I'm the lost sheep. I'm really clear about that. And that is transformative.
So you have a calling, I don't think that's too strong a word, to write this story.
Yes.
You don't even really know why at the time.
That's right.
You're just drawn to it. And we have to say, there are a lot of question marks about William Wallace. I mean, the truth of the matter is, Randy Wallace gave William Wallace a lot more shape than we had before this screenplay was written.
Right, nobody really knows anything William Wallace said.
Yeah. Well, now we know what he said.
Well,
freedom! We now know what he said, but we're not sure if he said it or not in life. But he did say it.
Right.
Tell me about that Braveheart moment where you are really on the fence. You only have one more screenplay in you before you're going to run out of time and money.
Right.
And your father wants you to come elsewhere. Go do something else.
That's right. And I'm worse than on the fence. I am broken, and I am desperate. I am so overwrought that I can't do the habits of discipline that have gotten me to that point. My hands are shaking. My stomach's in a knot. I can't sleep. I can't eat. And I'm thinking, my sons are going to see me collapse. And I saw my own father collapse.
When he was 38.
Yes, and about the age I was then. And so I get on my knees and I say, as sincerely to God as I know how to pray, if what I am to teach my sons is what happens when I collapse, when a man gets broken, and this gives me a chance to teach them how a man gets up, the way my father taught me. If that's what we're doing here, then give me the courage to bear this. Bring this to me and let me face it. But if I go down, let me go down, not on my knees to the false idols of Hollywood, to success, money. If I go down, let me go down with my own flag flying, saying, this is what I believe. This is who I am. And it was from not only that moment for me, but that gave me the words that made me understand what I thought William Wallace was doing on the battlefield, in the dungeon, on the executioner's platform. That's what gave me the window to see the story.
And it was really an insight into the battle, that internal battle that you were going through, that we all go through at some point.
Yes, yes. I think we all have our Braveheart moments that define us and that shape the rest of our lives.
Betrayal. You write about this. There's a whole chapter in the book about betrayal, which is something that it's really at the core. I didn't think about it, I guess, watching the movie, and I've seen it so many times, but it really is at the heart of the story.
Yes.
Because that's where the transformation happens.
That's right. That's right.
Through that betrayal.
That's right.
Talk to me a moment about your mother. You say somewhere in here that Braveheart would never have happened but for her.
Yes.
That seems curious. I understand your dad, but Mom?
I struggle to understand this, Ray, all the time in my life, how we combine all of us combine an aspect of the masculine and the feminine, whether we are men or women. How do you, and we have these little neat packages we make of it. But the fact was, in my life, my father was the one who sort of loved me unconditionally, and my mother was the one who had the standards. It was my mother who once said to me, son, if they crucified Jesus Christ, there are going to be some people that don't like you. And my mother believed, as Mark Twain did, if you were standing with the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. If everyone likes you, you're doing something wrong. So my mother gave me this attitude, this posture, I'm looking for my battle. I'm looking for the place in life where I draw the line and say, right here. I finally found the spot, right here. I don't step back from this point. I'll either die or I will be victorious, but even if I die, I do not lose because I am fighting for what I am for who I am and what's right.
While we're talking about women and Braveheart, what do you think is the magic, if it's there, that draws women in? Because normally, historical action, sandal and sword epics, this is not feminine fare. Yet, women are drawn to this story. What is it?
Women recognize authentic love. And that's what women want. You know, Sigmund Freud didn't have to look very far. It was right there.
Yeah.
Women want to be loved, and they want to be connected to love. And that's what the story of Braveheart is about. It's not a war story, it's a love story. I tell the story in the book of the young woman who watched a screening and at the Q&A afterwards stood up and said, I don't have a question. I just want to tell you my fiance died 6 months ago and told me before he died he wanted me to watch Braveheart so I would understand the way he loved me. And there's a sense that I wrote this book not just for her and not for me, but for that young man who understood that life is eternal, that what really is life is not about the scars or the sword that pierces our heart and makes our blood leak out. Our life doesn't leave us.
You also talk about fear in the book, how fear holds us back, stops us, and again, you tie it into women in a neat way, and you say, the moment a woman says, we need to talk about our relationship, you share that with people.
Well,
to me, this was a huge insight. I think you're right.
There was some comedian that said when his wife comes in and says, we need to talk, what he hears is, can I take a drill and just drill it into your brain? What I mean in the book is that so often those conversations come from a place of fear, and that what the woman is really saying to the man in that regard is that I don't really trust you, so I want to take over the reins. So I want to take away from you all of your authenticity and your integrity in this, and I want to destroy any chance I have for loving you. I want to make sure we kill it now because I'm afraid it's going to die. As opposed to, I will communicate with every way I live my life. I will be responsible for myself to the greatest extent, but understand what I love is you and what I want is to give you me. That's a whole different thing than being driven by fear.
I was amazed when, in the book, when you look at the totality of how long did it take you to write this screenplay, Braveheart?
The screenplay? Well, it took me 10 years to
Started.
sit down into the chair.
Yeah.
And it took me about 4 months to write. It came with remarkable rapidity for all of my. I've never written a screenplay any faster.
No outline.
None. No.
Not at all.
No.
Now, Randy? How do you sit down with no? You didn't know where you were going. You didn't know how this was going to end, even.
I didn't know how it would start. And in fact, the whole beginning of Braveheart, I wrote in an effort to just warm up. I didn't want the story to start in my conscious mind. I didn't want the story to start with William Wallace as a boy. So I just sat down to warm up, and my first words were, I will tell you of William Wallace. Historians will say I'm a liar, but history is written by those who have hanged the heroes. I never saw those words coming, and suddenly I kind of sat back and went, that's interesting. I'm curious to see where the rest of this goes. I didn't know when they were standing at the grave of his father and mother that the little girl would give him a flower. I didn't know that he would keep it.
Until you were there.
Until I was there. And I didn't know that she was there at his execution. When it happened, it took my breath away. I sat at my desk and I wept. And that was, to me, part of what I want this book to be. Sure, I want to share the story, particularly for my own sons.
Right.
But I wanted to share for everyone who's looking at a place in their life when they're not able to trust, they're not able to let go, not able to say, what value do I have? And to me, everyone, you have to get to this humble place of surrender first
There's a wonderful line here that jumped out at me where you say, I've learned that wounds are just as important as our weapons. How do those wounds shape Randy Wallace? And do you pass those wounds on to the next generation?
Well, the second part first, that's one of the scariest things for me. Do I pass my wounds to my children, or do I give them the strength to avoid them? I have said, you know my sons, we're friends. And I have said to my sons, if I had my way, I would take away from you everything that will make you a man. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every bloody nose, every skint knuckle. I would remove it all. I would fight every fight for you if I could. Yeah. But that's how they become men, and they get their own wounds, their own scars. I don't want to pass mine along in that I want to bear my own wounds. I say in the book something about that I learned from my father's wounds, and largely his wounds did become mine. The wound that kills us is the one inside our armor, the one we ignore, the one we don't open up and say, look, I'm bleeding here. And somebody's got to know how to touch that wound and how to heal it. That's another thing. When I hear the Jesus story, I go, all right, this story strikes me as so true. It has the ring of truth in all of the Gospels. I'll read a story and I'll know how everything is going to fall because I've told enough stories and I have enough story sense, and that's when a story seems false to me. But when a story surprises you, when you go, I didn't see this coming. Like I think in Braveheart, people didn't expect that William Wallace is going to be executed. They think surely somebody's going to swing in on vines and save him.
Right.
But then you see it happen and you go, you know what? This is how life works. And the life that surprises you at the end when it transforms everyone, not only Robert the Bruce, but the men who followed him, then that strikes us as true as well.
Yeah. The great line that people always remember from Braveheart, and that really is the spine of this book, is every man dies, but not every man really lives. How do you live the Braveheart life that you depict in this book, and that is captured in your great work?
That's the question I wanted to explore in writing this. I didn't want to tell Hollywood stories. I didn't want to, people, there's so many people who love Braveheart and they love to hear the story, but it's the question you just asked. How do we live this now? And to me, it's wrapped up in that statement. We all die, but that doesn't kill the really living part. It's the acceptance. Where that line came from, again, was inspired by the Gospels.
Yeah.
Jesus has been teaching his disciples. They've been with him almost without any restriction for 3 years. And yet he knows that they're all going to run away. Nobody's going to understand him. They're going to deny him. One's going to betray him. And yet he doesn't make the situation ethics decision, the rational one, to say, I should just back off here and go into the mountains and teach some more until they really understand.
And catch up.
And that my measure of who I am and what I will do will be judged by the standards of, do they understand? Let's have a show of hands. How many here believe that I'm here to transform you and save your lives? Oh, no one? Okay, well, let's wait until I can get there. But he makes a choice that's above and beyond the question of what do we understand, how does the world judge us? It's who are we made to be? Let's be that, because this body will die. But that's how we really live. For me, that's the best way I know to put it.
And 20 years, I can't believe it's been 20 years.
Oh, me neither.
Since Braveheart came. I want to end talking for a moment about working with Mel. I know you all have been collaborators on not just Braveheart, but a number of projects. I know you continue working with him. What did he bring to that particular film that might have been lost in the hands of another actor or director?
So many things. Absolute commitment. Now, but that alone isn't enough. But absolute commitment. There's an all-in quality about Mel.
Yeah.
But that was coupled with an appreciation for what the story was and what it spoke of. Mel got something that I don't know any other director who would have gotten, and I was not directing at the time, so
right.
I couldn't have. I had to grow into that role, but he understood when William Wallace is on his knees in the dungeon, praying, "Give me the strength. I'm so afraid. Give me the strength to die well." He's like, "Oh, well, that's Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane." Yes, yes,
he saw
you're right.
it.
He saw. He understood. He got it all. And we began to resonate with each other and not feel that either of us was so alone in this. We began to say, "Aha." We get each other.
I remember when The Passion came out and people said, "You know, it's a shame Mel didn't do The Passion, didn't act in The Passion." I said, "Sure he did. He just did it 10 years earlier."
And in a certain way, every character is
a refashioning of Jesus and a way to try to apprehend him.
right.
Right?
And you put yourself into every character. Leonardo DiCaprio, was in Man in the Iron Mask with Gabriel Byrne.
Another great movie, by the way, which
And-
you all should go buy. No, my boys love this movie. It's an adventure. It's about honor. It's about all the things.
Yes.
Really, it's about all the things you were doing in Braveheart as well. But go on. I'm sorry.
Right, and about your identity as well.
Right.
Who are you? And Gabe was asked why he. I think it was on one of the big talk shows when he was asked the question. But he was asked, why did you choose to be in this movie? And he said, well, I thought every character was powerful. And he said, I think that's because Randall saw himself as every character. And then he paused with this little Irish twinkle and he said, probably including the Queen. And the funny thing was, he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
In every character, you see yourself.
You yank
and you
a part
say,
of yourself.
if I were her, if these were the tools I had and these were the obstacles I faced, how would I feel?
Yeah.
And that's how you write a character that an actor looks at and says, I want to play that because I see that in myself. And that's why I say, for an audience, for a young man, a young woman who is looking at this book, it's not to tell them the stories of Randall Wallace, it's to say, who are you? What is in your life? What are the stories that when you tell this story or you hear this story, that you go, this is me?
Randy Wallace, thank you for the time.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Raymond. Thank you, my
Excellent.
friend.
Living the Braveheart Life by Randall Wallace is still available at bookstores everywhere and online. And summer's almost here. It's a great time to read the Will Wilder series with the whole family. All the books, 3 in the series so far, are available in paperback and in audiobook. You can still get hardback too. Go to willwilderbooks.com for a preview. You can order there. Don't forget about our World Over podcast. You can visit Apple's iTunes podcast store. Search World Over on Spotify. We're at EWTN World Over. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.